On this episode of Liberty Lens, I ask the question, are we watching the start of a quiet war in our own backyard? The Trump administration says it's taking out narco terrorists on the high seas. But the second missile, the one that allegedly hit survivors in the water, that has Congress whispering the words war crimes. And while Venezuela gets bombed, a convicted narco president gets a Trump presidential pardon. So, what's really going on here? Drug war, regime change, or something even uglier? Stick with us on Liberty Lens on this episode as we try to sort things out. And of course, helping me sort things out, none other than my friend and co host, Mr. Mike Termont. Mike, how are you doing today?
It's great to be with you. I am in Iowa presently, where it is cold and snowy. But, it is in much of the rest of the United States, too. So I'm not going to catch a lot of sympathy for that.
Yeah, and here in the Northeast, of course, we're gearing up with predictions of a terrible nor'easter coming to hit us. So the days of global warming, I assume, are over, at least for now.
They'll be back in the spring, John. Don't you worry.
Yeah, I'm not. Okay. Let's get on with today's show, because this is one that we've been talking about doing for a couple of weeks now, but we kept putting it off until maybe things got a little less murky. And I don't know if they've got less murky or more murkier, or murkier rather, to be grammatically correct there, Mike. But let's start off with the sort of a short history of Venezuela and where we're at with them. So, as everyone knows, the president has declared that narco terrorists are operating out of Venezuela. And as such, we started something called Operation, was it Southern Spear?
Yep.
Where we've essentially moved military and naval assets into the vicinity with the express purpose of, as Secretary of Defense / War Pete Hegseth says, kill all narco terrorists. We'll talk about the validity and constitutional basis on that. But just to be fair, this is not a new development. As far back as Trump's first administration in 2019, the Trump administration recognized the government of Guaido. Is that how you pronounce the gentleman's name?
Yes.
Who had lost elections or had been removed from power when Maduro had taken over. The Trump administration said, hey, we don't recognize Maduro. We don't like him. And ever since then, there has been narco terrorism indictments against Maduro. There's been a bounty put on him by the Department of Justice. It used to be $15 million under Trump 1. I believe it's been up to $50 million right now. There's been sanctions against Venezuela. There's been open conversations on the part of President Trump, open declarations that, hey, we want regime change. Hegseth the other day during one of those dog and pony cabinet meetings said, hey, you know what, Mike, why stop at the sea? Maybe we need to commence land operations in Venezuela. So given this history, Mike, why don't you tell me your thoughts and the validity of what the Trump administration is claiming right now?
I think that what the Trump administration is about to do is probably more valid than what they have been doing up until now. I think that this is a communications fiasco. If the Trump administration had come out of the box and said, well, if they had come out of the box and said what you just said, they'd be in a better position today, both legally and politically, than they actually are. Your point is paramount, that Maduro is not the recognized leader, recognized by the United States, leader of Venezuela. The United States government has long believed that the election that restored Maduro to power was fraudulent and that Maduro has to go. That's a really important point, because Venezuela is not far from the United States.
Right.
Is not a country that is doing a lot of things right in terms of being an ally to the United States, in terms of preventing the flow of drugs. This is a country that has all kinds of potential, right? its economic collapse is largely due to Maduro, by the way, and his regime in the past. He has grown close to both Russia and China. There is no reason to believe that the Maduro regime is headed in anything but a direction that will bring pain and sorrow to both the Venezuelan people and to the American people.
Okay, let me jump in here because I find this fascinating, which is, um, I think you and I can both admit Maduro's a bad dude. We can
Yeah.
admit that maybe he ascended to power illegally. Uh, but I will now push back as a good libertarian and say, why do we care? Certainly, if we can make the argument that we shouldn't be funding Ukraine, we shouldn't be sending resources to Ukraine. Can
Yep.
we not make the same argument about Venezuela? Meaning, like, okay, they elected themselves or they allowed themselves a horrible leader.
Yep.
They can choose who they trade with. Why is it any of the US business, certainly since they're not making any what would be traditionally referred to as aggressive military moves towards the US? Why would we care? Why is the Trump administration so hell bent on this as libertarians?
Two reasons. Two reasons on top of the fact that he's the illegitimate leader of that so-called past democracy.
Mm,
The number one reason is this is a guy who's been indicted in federal court for committing crimes against the United States citizens. That's huge.
mm,
In other words, this is a guy who can't visit the United States because he'd wind up in a federal penitentiary. We should be bringing him to justice, but it's only our libertarian leanings that keep us from invading him and taking him into custody.
right.
That's number one, and I don't want to minimize that. The second reason that we need to care is because the activities that led to his indictment continue apace. Now, you and I are going to talk about the legality of blowing up these boats. We're going to talk about the communications challenges around them. We're going to talk about the chain of command that is controlling how these are done, right? There's a whole lot there to talk about. But there is no getting around the fact that it is done with the awareness of the Venezuelan government, probably with the cover-up and protection of the Venezuelan government, that it is being done in violation of federal and state U.S. laws. And there's no getting around the fact that it's bad for us. So, now you and I are going to go back and be libertarians. And we should, right? Because there's some extremely important constitutional arguments at stake. But there's no getting around the fact that there is a group of people in Venezuela who have illegally taken power and now are illegally doing things that are bad for the United States, not just in a political sense, but in a real sense. And that is not something that we should put up with. So the question in my mind becomes, as good libertarian constitutionalists, what do we do about that?
Right.
And I think that there is an argument to be made for negotiating with the Venezuelan government until we bring him into custody. And I think that this idea of inching our way into it by blowing up boats has created a problem for the administration. It makes it look like the administration's not too sure of its legal footing. What is the foundation for the argument that we would be justified in bringing Maduro to power? If you were really comfortable in your argument, as I believe the Trump administration should be, then you wouldn't start out with blowing up boats. You would start out with a communications campaign aimed at explaining this to the American public, at getting congressional buy-in, negotiating with the Venezuelan government, including Maduro himself, because, maybe an option is that he just crawls off to a suburb of Moscow the rest of his life and Guaido comes to power. Maybe that is an option. It doesn't look like it today, but you gotta try. And at the end of that communications campaign, that what I would argue three-way communications campaign, you would then take fairly bold and decisive action to nip it in the bud. You wouldn't do this boat by boat.
Well, I think those are some interesting points you've made, because I'll still fall back, and again, I'll be more of the libertarian party line person here. This has all the earmarks of a drug war to escalate into real war for the specific purpose of what Venezuela is sitting on top of, which is oil.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Now, if that's not your goal, which I'm not convinced that it's not, but if that's not your goal, you are 100% correct that this is horrible communication, because we've seen, and I've seen it, I'm sure you have, a lot of these congressmen, senators, the Trump administration, everything, tying Venezuelan alleged drug boats to fentanyl deaths. And they're tying it to not blow up 100 narco terrorists because we don't want one more American dying from a fentanyl overdose, which kind of obscures the point that Venezuela has nothing to do with fentanyl. Mexico does. China, once removed, does. India, once removed, does. Venezuela, their main drug export is cocaine.
Right.
So by tying the fentanyl overdose crisis,
in fact, you can see some of the packages on the boats.
right, to the point that we can, right? So first of all,
fentanyl comes in extremely small quantities.
So the point is that you're using the fentanyl crisis as an excuse to bomb, in essence, souped up fishing boats, and then you have the ridiculous. Okay, you've got that,
which is dumb.
Which is dumb. Why do that? You've already set yourself up as being disingenuous by stating that connection, because we know it's not true. The second thing is you're claiming imminent danger.
It's not true enough.
Right.
It's not true. And, there may be fentanyl, and it is true that cocaine is illegal and bad for us. But it leaves open the question of why aren't you going after others?
Well, yeah, we'll get to those solid cases in a second. But I'm saying, specifically to Venezuela, when you're laying out this argument in that orchestrated reality TV cabinet meeting, we're attacking the fentanyl crisis, boss, by blowing every single narco terrorist out of the water. No, and it's not an imminent danger. So everybody who's claiming that as commander-in-chief, he has the right to move troops around and things like that, this is not imminent danger. If you can send out a Coast Guard cutter where they capture 3/4 of these things anyway without blowing them out of the water, that's not imminent danger. If you're planning these strikes ahead, it's not an imminent threat. It's not an imminent danger, right? So I think that the communication is absolutely horrible. The only reason they're getting away with it is because there's a whole lot of, let's face it, super duper ultra nationalists running around supporting Trump who couldn't care less if you kill people as long as it's holding an American flag, right? So how do we now distance ourselves from this being another failed drug war, Mike?
I think that might have been a slightly rough characterization of the supporters of the action.
My words, not Mike's. I want to emphasize that.
You may have roughed up a whole bunch of people there.
Right.
Look, I think that as someone who has done CPR on plenty of people dying from fentanyl overdoses, there is something to be said about the American public having a right to be pissed off.
Sure.
And the Trump administration is a populist one.
Mm-hmm.
And so that linkage is immediate.
Sure.
Right. we're pissed off. We've got a problem. We're going to take care of business. I think that it's important for us to remember what you and I say every week, which is the president gets crappy staff work.
Mm.
If it is true that what the president said reflects his center of gravity regarding the second strike incident, right? Everyone, I think, listening to us knows about the second strike incident where a boat was blown up, at least a couple of people survived, and the drone went back and killed them. And now we are arguing about who ordered that second strike, and was it gratuitous, or were these individuals, as they say, still in the fight, which is the pivot point for the legality of it. If it is true what President said about, I wouldn't have done that, right? And if it is true that this was done at the order of someone else, the big argument now is, was it the admiral or the Secretary of Defense? Then I think that it is true that the president continues to get crappy staff work, because it's one thing for the chief executive to say, we've got a problem, this is how we're going to address it. And it's another thing for military officers or those further down in the chain of command to flaunt the Constitution and say, this is what the boss wants, and now we don't care about due process. We don't care about the laws of armed conduct, internationally speaking. We don't care about, the Code of Military Justice or the Defense Department's many manuals. That's not okay. So I think that we're stuck in this weird spot where the administration has pursued a tepid course, where they would have been better off with something more bold. And I think you're exactly right that so much of the motivation is the vast reserves of oil, that the administration was hesitant when it didn't need to be, was hesitant about saying this is really about replacing Maduro for legal reasons.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're saying, again, is the communication angle, because if you're Pete Hegseth, who makes a show of running around, showing off his tattoos, doing pull-ups and push-ups every chance he gets for the cameras, complaining about overweight generals and people with beards, like his whole I'm a character from a Call of Duty cosplay,
Right.
right? When you run around projecting that image, whether you and I agree with whether he should be doing it or that, but the fact is he does it, and no one's putting a
He
gun
should
to his
not
head.
be doing it. Let me
Absolutely.
just say that. He should not be doing that. He does not understand his job, but go ahead. We'll get to that.
Correct. But when you act that way, it is not then unreasonable for someone who sees this action out in international waters, who says, this guy's just interested in killing people, because he's very proud of the fact that he goes out and says, my job is to kill. We will be killing more narco terrorists. That's not my assessment. Those are his words. So hasn't someone thought of corralling this guy early on and saying, look, do what you do, but at least try to cut a professional figure, even if you're not, at least try to project one. It'll help you in the long run for any potential trials that might be coming down the road.
Well, trials with a lowercase t, hopefully. Look,
Yes.
Not only is everything you just said true, but I would see your complaint and raise you 2 notches.
Okay.
The specific job of the Secretary of Defense is to not look this way. That is his job. His job is to not look this way, to not use the word lethality in every single paragraph.
Right.
Your job is to manifest the democratically representative government of the United States at the top of the Defense Department, your job is to impose the ethics of the American populace on the military, not the other way around. It has long been said that we need secretaries of defense who have some military experience. I am not convinced that is true. I'm willing to tolerate that argument. I think there's an argument to be made for it, but I'm not yet convinced that that is true, much less someone who sees the world through a military lens. That is unacceptable. The Secretary of Defense must see the world through the lens of democracy and the projection of American values around the world, beginning domestically.
Right.
If you believe that your job is to make the Defense Department more lethal, you are exactly the wrong guy to be Secretary of Defense. Exactly. You should go to the bottom of the list.
You shouldn't be on the list.
Your job is to make sure that the Defense Department acts in an ethical fashion. That's your job.
Right. And again, this is when you and I, back when he was being confirmed, I think both of us said he's the one that we're not sure if he's going to get through. Like, if you go back and catch those Liberty Lens episodes, we're like, he's the one that both of us were most on the fence about. Yeah. And I kind of knew we were in trouble when he decided that he's not the Secretary of Defense anymore. He's the Secretary of War. And again, it's that communication, it's that projection. There's a reason why it's the Department of Defense, and the reason why Congress hasn't changed that name since, when was it, the 30s or the 40s, right? Because we don't want to project this lethality. We don't want to project aggression. We want to project we're defending liberty. We're defending our values. We're not imposing them on others. We're not out attacking others. And I think that even to this day, someone referred to him as the Secretary of Defense in one of these pressers, and he corrected him. He said, "I'm the Secretary of War." So even in the face of all this, he's still clinging to that, what you said, lethality, war, aggression, hoorah, or whatever it is they say, right? That is what he's trying to project right now. So, and to your point, if I'm sympathetic towards him, it would be like a lawyer telling his client to shut his mouth. No good will come out of you flapping your gums right now. Just
you have to at least pretend to understand your job.
I would think so, Mike. I would think so.
That's your point. Your point is, do us a favor and at least pretend to understand your job.
Okay.
Because it is the job of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to make the organization more lethal. And it is the job of the Secretary of Defense to make sure that all of that is exercised in an ethical fashion. I use ethical as shorthand for representing the interests and the underlying values of the American public.
Right. And look, I mean, I don't mean to personalize this to you, right? But being a former police officer, I would expect that you know how to use a firearm. I would expect that you've passed your target qualifications or whatever that's referred to in the police department, Mike. I wouldn't expect you to patrol the street or ride around in a squad car with a rifle in your hand, just aiming at people, because you want to prove that you're lethal, right? I expect you to be prepared. I expect you to be ready to do your job and be trained to the maximum possible. But I don't expect you to go around shooting people to prove it willy-nilly. So anyway, I think we've made our point on that. Now,
it would not reflect the values of the community that employed me.
Correct.
For the police department to brag about how tough we were.
Right.
Now, at the same time, there were people in the police department whose job was to make us as tough as possible. And indeed, I was a defensive tactics instructor certified.
Oh, okay.
And, so I've been through that training. And as anyone who's a cop for 11 and a half years, you, how do I say this politely, went through the real thing a few times, right?
Right.
And that's too bad, but that's reality. But you do not take opportunities to project that to the public as being your center of gravity. Your center of gravity is to stand up for the rights of the members of your community.
Right.
And that's the right to not be hassled by your government, and your right not to be illegally hassled by your neighbors.
Well said. Okay, politically now, the emergence or the focus on the September 2nd so-called double tap, double strike. We have
Yep.
we have the administration's version, Pete Hegseth's version, which, to be fair, there was a New York Times report right before this episode we started taping, which seems to uh, contradict the original report that Hegseth may have given the order to kill everybody initially, but not specifically to this event, which then Admiral Bradley then interpreted as send the drone back. So, to your point, whether it was Hegseth directly, whether this is politics, we saw Trump on Air Force One start to distance himself and insulate himself, right? I would not have done that. I would not have ordered that, but I stand by Pete. Pete Hegseth was like, well, kill all terrorists, but I did not give that direct order. So now you could see where it's water falling down, right? The president probably has immunity anyway. Pete Hegseth probably doesn't have immunity, but he's already got plausible deniability, like a mafia don. Like, well, nobody heard me give the order to rub somebody out, right? Like one of the capos did, right? So it's
Well, and he may not have said it.
No,
he
no.
may not have said it.
I am giving.
Yeah. We'll have to wait and see.
Right.
And by the way, just to repeat what I may have alluded to earlier, I do believe, for all the goofy things that Donald Trump says, that for which you and I have been critical over the weeks and months and years, I don't believe he's a killer. I just don't believe that that's his center of gravity, that his big thing is let's go around killing people. When he says the opposite, I believe him.
I'll tend to believe him in any given moment. I just think he has a cognitive dissonance that what he says and what the results of what he says are, I think he loses the connective tissue at some point. So, like,
that happens, but that's my point. That the Pete Hegseth's job is to be that go-between.
Right.
Boss, you want this done, right? Admiral, your job is to do it.
Right.
Let me make sure we're all on the same page.
Right.
That's what you need Pete to be doing, and it just doesn't seem that he understands that.
Right. Now, one of the things also that I wanted to bring up on this front, that if we, rather than frame this as we're somehow helping a nation get rid of an illegitimate leader that we do not recognize, which, to your point,
good word, by the way, helping. We're helping.
I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Here to serve you better. We're making some changes.
Right. We're from our government to help your government, right? But anyway,
right.
But by framing it as, in essence, a drug war, and I don't think I'm putting words in anybody's mouth. The administration has framed it as such.
Yep.
Why did we let off a convicted, indicted narco president from Honduras?
Yep.
And I'm trying to kill some time while I talk and try to figure out the guy's name in my notes. Juan Orlando Hernandez. Who was the former Honduran president. He had been convicted in U.S. courts for aiding cartels in moving hundreds of tons of cocaine into the U.S. He was pardoned by Donald Trump very recently. Okay? Now, if you're the Trump administration and you are justifying what some people are referring to flat out either war crimes or murder on the high seas on the basis that you're defending this country from all these fentanyl deaths, which we've kind of established, the administration has established Venezuela has nothing to do with, but that aside, why are we now pardoning a convicted narco president? It seems to be that even if you were convinced of Hernandez's innocence, that he got railroaded by the Biden administration, whatever,
Yep.
is now the time when you're launching a drug war, which could culminate in regime change in Venezuela, is now the time, again, from a PR perspective, to say, hey, boss, you know what you should do right now? Pardon a convicted narco president.
Yeah. Look, there's in my head, there are two leading theories. I'm interested in which one you like better. One
Okay.
is the same hobby horse every week, which is the president's getting really bad staff work. And, he heard from someone that this guy got railroaded, and the staff just, no one had the guts to tell the president, some combination of he had it coming. The sentence wasn't all that bad relative to what he did and what he was convicted of, and it's horrible timing. Okay, that's theory number one. And there's something to be said. In other words, this is just a cluster, right?
Right.
This is just badly mangled policy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of argument there,
Right.
and
Right.
and a lot of analysis from people like you and me is
Right.
going to figure it out. It's just a
Right.
cluster. Okay, that's theory number one. Theory number two is that there's another shoe to drop, and we're not going to know what that shoe is for another 5 or 6 years.
You think there's something even more deep state-ish going on here?
Yeah, deep state-ish. Someone has an interest that aligns with an interest of the administration to accomplish something that's going to, be easier to accomplish if we make some weird sort of deal. And I have guesses that I am not going to, to which I'm not going to give voice.
Fair enough.
Most of my guesses are wrong anyway. Nobody wants to hear them. But I'm going to go 50-50. That theory one is, this is just a cluster. This is just a screw up. It's a bad idea. Someone started a rumor that made its way around the White House, and no one had the guts to say this is stupid. And theory two is that at least someone in the administration knows exactly what they're doing. And we may not know what that is for quite some time.
Okay. Those are interesting options. For the sake of brevity, I'll go with option A. It's just a cluster. Because, it's the
because it so
simplest.
often is.
Right. It's Occam's razor, right? Like, if incompetence explains things, it's most likely the correct, the correct option if it's pure incompetence, which I think it might be.
Well,
and again,
it so often is, and the Occam's razor theory is, the one that's most likely to explain. But as someone who has worked for the federal government, I need to chime in with some expertise here. The federal government does a lot of things badly. Just a lot of things badly.
No argument here.
And so it's not just a matter of sometimes things are simpler and there really isn't this giant conspiracy theory. Those things can be true. But I think that the public generally underestimates the rate at which federal officials make mistakes. I think it's just hard for people to comprehend.
Okay, yeah, because the other angle, as you were explaining that, is that yesterday or early this morning, the president issued one of his Truth Social things where he declared all auto pen
yes.
Null and void, which of course I laughed at because he doesn't have the authority to do that, and it's not like pardons are revocable, right? But it's interesting to me that one of his
that they were.
He asserted that they were, of course.
He asserted that they were. The courts aren't going to back him up on that.
No, of course not. But it's interesting to me that here you are, that one of Trump's prime defenses might be, I didn't know who this Hernandez guy was. Somebody put a pardon in front of me and told me to sign it, and I did. Right? Because that's in essence what his best defense is right now. I get thousands of these pardons. I pardoned thought. It's the same thing that happened with the J6 pardons, right? Like he basically, when it was pointed out to him that, hey, you actually pardoned people who were convicted of violent crimes. He said, well, sorry, they just put a lot of papers in front of me and I signed them.
Yeah.
So it's ironic to me that in the same time frame where his best defense against the embarrassment of pardoning a narco president, he issues this thing that says, "Hey, sleepy Joe Biden didn't know what he was signing." His best defense right now is, "I didn't know I was pardoning this guy, or else I would have never done it." Right?
Yeah. Again, it
From
comes
a
down to
PR perspective,
crappy staff work.
agree,
Better staff work would have teased out how those pardons were handled. He thought it was nothing but a political matter.
right.
And
Before,
it
I'm sorry,
was,
Mike.
no, I was just going to say it had real world implications. There were
Yeah,
people pardoned who should not have been pardoned. It is true, from what I have seen, it is true that there were folks who were prosecuted much more harshly than they would have been outside of a political context.
sure,
So
absolutely.
I'm sensitive to the idea that there were folks whose sentences had to be terminated or eviscerated completely. I think that there are a lot of people in that category. But then to extend that to people who knowingly and intentionally inflicted violence upon law enforcement officers, I can't tolerate that. And I fault the president for not being more sensitive to that issue. He got horrific staff work, but in this particular case, it was so ham-handed that he should have demanded better staff work.
Right, right. Okay, Mike. So before we get to a final conclusion on what we expect in Venezuela, let me ask you this. For the first time in a long time, we have some bipartisan agreement on the Hill. Usually they only agree when it comes to raising the debt ceiling. But on this matter, Republicans and Democrats have agreed that they want to take a look at what is actually happening with these strikes, because it seems that some members of Congress are actually concerned about the possibility of war crimes. Now, again, war crimes in the sense that it doesn't matter if there's declared war, enemy combatants, designated terrorists, it doesn't matter. There's the UCMJ,
Yep.
Military Justice Manual, and also the Geneva Convention that the U.S. is a signatory to, that would prohibit, as you said, even enemy soldiers who are out of the fight and clinging to the wreckage of a boat in the middle of nowhere, certainly qualifies as that prohibits their murder.
Yep.
This is part of those unconstitutional, unlawful acts that the so-called seditious six may have been alluding to, right? That's a whole talk about things weaving together, Mike, in a short period of time.
Yep.
But do you feel that we may be on the precipice of Congress, for the first time in a very long time, starting to reclaim some of its constitutional obligations when it comes to armed conflict, bombing people in the middle of nowhere, war, things of that nature?
Yes, but I don't think it has anything to do with the war. I think it has everything to do with domestic politics. I think
Mm.
a lot of folks are afraid that President Trump may be losing some of his juice, some of his control over the Republican Party. And so, to the extent to which there are things that are done, either intentionally or by mistake, or bad policy, or bad outcomes, even when it's good policy, and the American get pissy about it,
Right.
President Trump's coattails may not be all of what you need to ride to success. And so you better start standing up for, doing the right thing and looking like you're interested in doing the right thing.
Right.
I think that's what's going on here. This particular manifestation of that concern, of diminished political oomph from the president, is in foreign affairs. But I think that's just because that's the hot topic of the moment. In a few weeks, there could be a completely, and this will be the proof in the pudding over the next few weeks and few months, if Congress looks like it's reclaiming some of its authority in other areas, then I think that'll be the writing on the wall, that this isn't a matter of just worrying about awkward foreign policy. This is a matter of looking a little bit more independent, because up until now, the administration has been able to do whatever it wants, and not just in foreign policy, without anybody on the Hill in the Republican Party batting an eye about it.
Right, right. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can fix this. Okay. For some reason, I went out of focus, and I don't know why. Hold on. We'll pick up right after that because I had one more point to make. Hold on. Whoa, come on. Why are you doing this to me?
It still looks the same, doesn't it?
Yeah. It just completely.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, okay.
It fixed.
Cool. It fixed. Okay. So we'll just continue from here. 3, 2, 1, and I will. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Yeah, you're right, Mike. I hope they do actually regain some of their constitutional things. And you're right. It doesn't have to be foreign policy because right now we've heard that, for example, Costco is suing the government in order to reclaim what it had paid in tariffs importing goods. They're suing the government for reclamation to what we've always said the president probably doesn't have the authority to unilaterally do indefinitely. So we'll see how that turns out. And you're right. Let's see if Congress does decide to take back some of its power. Okay.
That will be a particularly interesting case, John.
Yes.
Because while I believe it's, I think it's fairly clear that the president never had the authority to unilaterally impose tariffs. The court could go either way on that. But even if the court decides that the president didn't have the authority, what to do about that is a real conundrum. Because it's not just Costco.
Oh, sure.
It's a whole lot of people, right? So it's one thing to say, from now on, cut it out. It's another thing to say, the past 8 months, you got a whole lot of paying people back to do.
Right, because as the president is wont to brag, they've collected $300 billion in what they call tariff revenue, which you and I both know is in taxes. So they would have a whole lot of tax rebate checks to send out if the court rules against them and decides the remedy is to refund that money.
Yeah, because the problem is not the amount of money, but the number of checks.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's a headache.
It's a hassle.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt. It is a headache. Okay. Without getting into a separate economics issue, let's now wrap this up. Where do you think we're heading with Venezuela specifically?
War.
You think it's flat out war?
Yeah, flat out war.
Okay. It doesn't make me happy, although the conviction of your answer does project a certain Hexeth style of strength.
Look, we're at war now.
Yes.
We're at war with Venezuela now. We have imposed a no-fly zone.
Yes.
That's an act of war, right? We are destroying boats as they leave. I'm not suggesting that that's a bad idea, by the way. I think that there should have been more due process behind it. But having said that, however, you can't square that circle. That's an act of war. Now, you can argue it's justified. You can argue it's a good idea. You can argue that the president is within his authority before going to Congress for long-term support because these boats represent an immediate threat. You can make that argument. You might get pushback, right? But at least you can make that argument. But that's an act of war. So we're at war with Venezuela now. The issue is, how much is it going to escalate? And I think that depends on negotiation with Maduro. He agrees to leave. There is some transition that is agreed to, which probably is going to include a pathway to economic investment and transactions taking place. You and I didn't quite wrap up what I thought was an important point that you were making, that there are other countries in the area and around the world that import bad things to the United States. We're not going to war with all of them. I think Venezuela is a unique case because of the oil, because of the growing relationships with our adversaries. I don't think this resolves without the administration getting from Venezuela at least guarantees and possibly agreements in place that things are going to work better from the standpoint of American interests going forward. And I think that that's got to include investment, access to oil, and Maduro leaving. Now, you can argue that all of that is by coercion an act of war, and you can argue that that's a fairly non-libertarian intervention into someone else's business.
Right.
But you cannot argue that that would not be in the interest of the American people. And you cannot argue that that would not be in the interest of the Venezuelan people. So
What
it really
if-
comes.
I was going to say, what if China and or Putin decide to get involved?
I don't think that they will. It's our hemisphere, not theirs. That's how they think. You know, I think that is a very natural concept. I think that that's a more natural concept for them than it is for the American public. You know, if Trump were to say, you know, this is the Americas, and so we're in charge. If he said it just like that, just ham-handed, right? No thought behind it whatsoever. This is America's, we're in charge. Everyone else leave us alone. I think the Chinese would say, yeah, we get that. And the Russians would say, yeah, we get that. I think it's the American public that would say, really? That's how this works? So I think that his challenge is more communications to the American electorate and to make the case constitutionally that it is Venezuela that has created this conflict through the crimes committed by Maduro and through the crimes committed by the drug runners, and therefore he's got to go.
Do you think the American public has the stomach for American boots on the ground in Venezuela? If it comes to that.
I think so. I think the American public will be split on it like everything else. I fear that the administration will not do a good enough job selling it, and so it will split the American people further and needlessly. So that's a shame. But if you can get in and out, you know, Noriega style, right? It's not like we haven't done this before. If you can get in and out, I think the administration would look good. I think that the vast majority of the president's supporters and half the rest of the United States would say, look, guys under the government is still exporting drugs to the United States. We had to do something about it. I think the public largely with him. It really comes down to how clean an operation it is. I think that the support will not be contingent on the constitutionality. I think the support will be contingent on the communications up front and the success of the operation itself.
And do we stop there, Mike, in your opinion? Do we target Mexico next, since they are the major import hub for fentanyl into the U.S.? Do we go after Colombia?
I think that's extremely likely. Depending on how it goes, I think that's extremely likely. I think it's a bad idea, but I think it's extremely likely. And I think it's a bad idea for a couple of reasons. One is that if Congress isn't involved, it's not going to be constitutional. Even if Congress is involved, it's very difficult to argue that there's an imminent threat that suggests that we should be at war with Mexico. Just a few years ago, that idea would have seemed absolutely stupid to the point of it being an unfunny joke. And now we're talking about going to war with our neighbors in the Americas. I think it's number three, it's a bad idea from the standpoint of passing up good alternatives. One thing you learn in police work is that cooperation across agencies is how to get the job done. If we were to commit thousands of troops to helping Mexico, I think that you could get something really useful, because the Mexican government recognizes that it is not in control of huge swaths of the Mexican countryside. And nobody thinks this is a good idea, least of all the Mexican people.
Right.
There is a cooperative angle here to be had in which everyone looks good. And I would be afraid that the administration will not avail itself of that opportunity. And then number 4, the reason I think it's such a bad idea is that it undermines our soft power around the world. It undermines our image of an ethical broker and a moralistically behaving player, right? It undermines your moral authority. How do you lecture Vladimir Putin if you're invading Venezuela and Mexico? And, everyone settle down. I know there's a difference, but to pretend that that doesn't make it harder on us around the world is to pretend that something is true that isn't. You and I have often, I know I have said many, many times that we need a more independent foreign policy, and Israel needs a more independent foreign policy from each other. That I think that our foreign policies are much too intertwined. And part of that reason is because we don't want to be on the hook. We don't want to be politically liable for the actions that each government feels that it needs to make in order for it to defend itself or to pursue its interests, as much as we may disagree, right? We may disagree with what they do and they may disagree with what we do, but we need a relationship in which we can move ahead and do the things that we need to do without looking over our shoulder. And I believe that in the long run, the Israeli government would not be served well with a relationship with a government in Washington that goes around invading nations in our own hemisphere.
I agree. Well, I don't think any of this is pleasant, and quite honestly, I appreciate your sort of analysis, but in my opinion, I think we're heading down a horrible path. We've seen how this turns out, type of thing. You know what I mean? We've seen what drug wars can do. We know they're not a solution. The main reason drugs are imported into the U.S. is the American people are providing a very robust and booming market for what are now illegal drugs, whether it's cocaine, fentanyl, or anything else. So let's go back to that libertarian principle: decriminalize all this stuff, and then you just have voluntary trade. Like you turn it into any other business. I don't see people. We have 70,000 deaths a year directly related to drunk driving. I don't see the Trump administration doing lethal kinetic strikes on Anheuser-Busch trucks on I-95. Okay. So
true. As attenuated as that analogy might be, I agree with you that the criminalization of drugs in the United States has proven an abject failure.
Right.
And that we need to rethink this at a very, very fundamental level. And I would argue that the first step is to decriminalize mere possession and get to a regulated form of distribution that can be controlled. Because one of the things you learn if you're in this business, as I was in law enforcement, is that what's killing people is the combination of use and fraud. People don't understand what it is that they're using. They don't understand the quantity, the
Right.
strength, the lethality, to use Pete's word. And that's part and parcel of all of this being handled in a black market. Black markets are dangerous. Black markets kill people. And when you've got something as lethal as drugs in a black market, this is how you get the 100,000 deaths a year. So I agree with you. It has to be rethought at a very fundamental level. I also agree with you that the war that we're about to look at could go very badly. All war goes very
Right.
badly by virtually by definition, but it could go badly even by the standards of war. And I think that, John, a couple of things are worth mentioning. One is that we we don't seem as a government to recognize that the Constitution is there to limit the power of the government. And that when the Constitution is, when you find a gray zone in the Constitution, that doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. And the administration today is operating in what it wants to characterize as a gray zone between federal law enforcement and international armed conflict. And they think that they can get away with this because it's in a gray zone. And I believe that's the reason why we have been inching into it by attacking these boats, because it fit in a gray zone as opposed to an obvious act of war. And,
Right.
and that's not only dopey from a strategic point of view, but a complete and fundamental misinterpretation of the nature of our Constitution
Right.
and where the authority of the federal government comes from. As you and I know, and I wish everyone in the administration understood, to the extent to which the Constitution doesn't say do something, you can't do it as a government. And that's a real problem. And then the last thing, at the risk of sounding slightly optimistic, I think that one of the solutions that has to be brought to bear over the next few years is that we need to understand at a political level that it's okay to lean into the basic American ethic of valuing human life for the sake of it.
Right.
The idea that people have value, their lives are worth protecting just because of their humanity, not because of their economic product, not because of which party they're in, not because of what nation of which they are a citizen. And I think that the vast majority of Americans, I would go so far as to say virtually all Americans, and the vast majority of folks outside of the United States would agree with that. And I wish that our politicians would take it to heart. I think a lot of politicians would agree with that also. But for so many weird reasons, power grabbing and deal cutting and populist manipulation of the voting electorate, politicians don't lean into that very fundamental ethic that would better reflect the interests and the morality of the American public.
Yeah, it's something that disheartens me a lot as I get older and see how things are changing around me, that so many people are willing to disregard that basic American ethos of basic respect for humans, for other people. And right now, unfortunately, I see too much of it politicized. You see people who still claim the Constitution is only for Americans. It's only for natural born Americans.
Right.
You see other things. We should have no foreigners in Congress, right? Like the framers already thought this stuff out, right? We don't need to sort of relitigate this. We already know who the Constitution is for. It's for everybody. War is war, whether it's declared, undeclared, on the QT, whatever. It's still the taking of life, and people, I think, are a little desensitized to that right now,
Extremely.
and that's very disheartening to me. But to that extent, Mike, let's end the show now. Hopefully, this won't escalate any more than it has to. We'll see how it turns out. Hopefully, I hope my friend Mike is wrong when he thinks we're headed to full out war with Venezuela. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree with him. Until next time. Oh, do us a favor. Uh, hit the comment section. Let us know what you thought of today's episode. Let us know, are we heading toward with Venezuela? Is that something our viewers are looking forward to? Do they feel the Trump administration is justified in setting us up for? Let us know. The only way we'll know if we're entertaining you, educating you, or making you think a little bit, drop us a comment. Do us also a favor and subscribe wherever you're watching this, or follow us. That would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, for Mike Termott and myself, Big John, peace, everyone.